General Hospital will reveal Josslyn found herself standing on the precipice of a nightmare she could not escape. In a single moment of fear and desperation, she had pulled the trigger, ending Cyrus's life. The gunshot still echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder of what she had done. The weight of her actions pressed down on her chest, suffocating her with the realization that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. This was not self-defense in the eyes of the law, it was murder. And if the truth came to light, she knew she would lose everything, her freedom, her future, and the life she had always taken for granted. Every breath felt like a countdown to disaster. The world around her continued to move, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her. But Josslyn knew better, she could feel it coming, the inevitable reckoning. The authorities would investigate, and they would find the truth. The evidence would pile up, leading straight to her. And once they did, there would be no escaping the consequences. The thought of a courtroom, a judge, a jury, all of them deciding her fate, sent shivers down her spine. She needed a way out. She needed to erase her involvement before it was too late. Carly's world shattered the moment she discovered what Josslyn had done. The agony of knowing that her daughter had taken a life, that she had been dragged into a world of violence and crime, was unbearable. But beyond the heartbreak, beyond the horror, Carly felt something even stronger, an unshakable resolve. She could not, would not, allow her daughter to be swallowed by this nightmare. She had fought her entire life to protect Josslyn from the dangers of the underworld that surrounded them, and now, despite all her efforts, her worst fear had come true. But Carly was no stranger to impossible situations. She had spent years navigating the deadly world of crime, power, and betrayal. She knew how these things worked. How people disappeared, how crimes were covered up, how innocent people were framed. If she wanted to save Josslyn, she would have to act fast. There was no room for hesitation. And if protecting her daughter meant stepping into dangerous territory, if it meant facing off against people far more ruthless than herself, then so be it. She had faced monsters before. She could do it again. Josslyn, however, knew that the danger was far from over. Brennan had positioned himself as her only hope, the one person who could make this all go away. But she wasn't naive. She understood the kind of man Brennan was. His generosity came with strings attached, strings that would tighten around her neck if she wasn't careful. He had protected her, covered up what she had done, but at what cost? She could already see the way he looked at her, like a chess piece he had successfully maneuvered into place. She was trapped. If she turned herself in, Jason would take the fall for a crime he didn't commit. If she stayed silent, she would remain under Brennan's thumb, forced to play by his rules for the rest of her life. The walls were closing in on her, and she had no idea how to escape. But one thing was clear, she needed to act before it was too late. Before Brennan took complete control. Before the truth destroyed not just her, but everyone she cared about. In a moment of sheer desperation, Josslyn put pen to paper, her hands trembling as she poured out her fear and anguish in a letter to Michael. She had no other choice, no one else she could trust. Every word she wrote carried the weight of her despair, a silent plea for her brother to save her from the nightmare she had stumbled into. She knew that once Michael read her message, there would be no turning back. When Michael finally received the letter, he felt as though the ground had been ripped out from beneath him. His chest tightened as he absorbed every word, his mind struggling to process the gravity of the situation. Josslyn, his baby sister, was caught in something dark and dangerous, something that could ruin her life forever. The thought of her suffering alone, terrified and trapped, was unbearable. He knew she needed him, and he knew that if he didn't act now, she would be lost. Michael had spent the past several months in Germany, rebuilding his life away from the chaos of Port Charles. He had thought distance would grant him peace, a reprieve from the relentless battles that had defined his existence. But now, none of that mattered. Josslyn needed him, and that was all it took for him to abandon everything and return home. However, Michael knew that walking back into Port Charles as the man he had been before was not an option. If he wanted to help Josslyn, if he wanted to dismantle the web of deceit and danger she was ensnared in, he would have to be smarter. Stronger. More ruthless than he had ever been. So he didn't just return, he transformed. The Michael Corinthos who left Port Charles was gone. The man who returned was someone new, someone hardened by the world he had immersed himself in. He had cultivated connections, learned strategies that few could match. His time away had given him access to power and influence that he had never wielded before. And now, he would use every resource at his disposal to protect his sister and bring down anyone who dared to threaten her. He stepped off the plane with a quiet, calculated determination, his new appearance only a reflection of the transformation that had taken place within him. He was no longer just the heir to the Corinthos legacy. He was a force to be reckoned with. And he had one mission, to save Josslyn at all costs. With no other choice left, Michael made the fateful decision to join forces with Sonny. Despite their past conflicts and personal grievances, this was bigger than either of them, it was about family. Josslyn's life was on the line, and Jason, a man who had sacrificed so much for them, was being set up to take the fall for a crime he didn't commit. There was no room for hesitation or misplaced pride. If they wanted to dismantle Brennan's scheme and rescue their loved ones, they needed to act swiftly and decisively. From the moment their partnership was sealed, Michael and Sonny began crafting a meticulous plan, one that would not only secure Jason and Josslyn's freedom but also expose Brennan's web of deceit and corruption. Every move had to be precise, every step calculated. They couldn't afford mistakes. Brennan was a formidable opponent, one who thrived in the shadows, manipulating people like pawns in a game only he fully understood. But what Brennan didn't anticipate was that Michael and Sonny were willing to go further, dig deeper, and destroy everything he had built. First, they focused on unraveling the evidence Brennan had carefully constructed to frame Jason. Using their network of allies, they began identifying the fabricated forensic reports, the tampered security footage, and the manipulated witness statements Brennan had planted. Bit by bit, they worked to dismantle the false narrative he had spun, replacing it with undeniable proof of his deception. Next, they set their sights on destabilizing Brennan's power. Sonny called in favors from old associates, ensuring that Brennan's resources, both legal and illegal, were compromised. Michael, leveraging his financial acumen, orchestrated quiet yet devastating strikes against Brennan's financial operations, cutting off his ability to fund his elaborate schemes. Every move they made forced Brennan further into a corner, pushing him toward a mistake. But the most critical part of their plan was forcing Brennan to expose himself. They needed him to slip, to leave behind evidence that would tie him directly to the cover-up. To achieve this, Michael and Sonny staged a carefully orchestrated trap. They created a situation where Brennan would have no choice but to intervene personally, an opportunity too enticing for a man like him to resist. As Brennan moved to protect his lies, he unknowingly walked straight into their hands. The trail of deception he had so carefully hidden was now out in the open for those who knew where to look. His once flawless scheme began to unravel before his eyes, and for the first time, he realized that he was the one being outplayed. Michael and Sonny had done the impossible. The evidence that once pointed to Jason now pointed directly at Brennan. And as the final pieces fell into place, Brennan found himself in a desperate position, one where even his influence within WSB might not be enough to save him. On the surface, Brennan appeared to be Josslyn's savior, the one person willing to protect her from the devastating consequences of Cyrus's death. He presented himself as an ally, shielding her from the inevitable fallout, making the crime seemingly disappear as though it had never happened. But beneath that facade of protection lay a far more sinister truth: he wasn't saving her, he was ensnaring her. Josslyn was no longer just a young woman who had made a fatal mistake. In Brennan's eyes, she was now a pawn, a valuable asset he could manipulate at will. By covering up the crime, he ensured her silence, but more than that, he ensured her obedience. Every favor he extended, Every action he took to erase the truth came with an unspoken price, a debt that Josslyn would have to repay, one way or another. The walls around her were closing in, but not from the police or the legal system. No, her true prison was the invisible web Brennan had spun around her. He knew exactly how to exploit her fear, her guilt, and most of all, her desire to protect Jason. By keeping her trapped in this unspoken agreement, he was making it clear. If she wanted to keep her secret safe, if she wanted Jason to remain free, she would have to surrender herself to his will. Josslyn quickly realized that Brennan's grip on her life extended far beyond this one cover-up. He was integrating her into a network of power and influence, threading her existence into something much larger than herself. Every demand he made seemed small at first, a meeting here, a favor there, but she knew it was only the beginning. He was conditioning her, testing her, slowly bending her to his control until she had no choice but to obey. The most terrifying part was that there was no easy escape. If she defied him, he could turn on her in an instant. If she tried to confess, Brennan had the resources to spin the narrative however he pleased, ensuring that the blame would shift elsewhere, perhaps even to Jason. He held all the cards, and the more Josslyn fought against his control, the tighter his hold became. What had started as an act of self-defense had now turned into a nightmare far worse than she could have ever imagined. Brennan had positioned himself as her protector, but in reality, he was her captor. And if she couldn't find a way out soon, she feared she would never be free again. Everything became even more complicated when the evidence Brennan had carefully planted all pointed to one damning conclusion: Jason was the killer. It was a masterful setup, executed with precision, leaving just enough ambiguity to make the case against Jason appear airtight. There was no trace of Josslyn's involvement, no leads that could point the authorities in any other direction. To the world, Jason was the only suspect, and unless something changed, he would be the one to take the fall for Cyrus's death. This was exactly the opportunity Brennan had been waiting for. For years, he had sought control over Jason, a man whose skills, discipline, and unwavering loyalty made him the perfect asset. But Jason had always resisted, refusing to become a tool for Brennan's operations. Now, that resistance was no longer an option. With his back against the wall, Jason had only two choices: either accept Brennan's terms and work for him, or spend the rest of his life behind bars for a murder he didn't commit. Josslyn, who had been drowning in her own fear and guilt, now realized the full extent of the damage she had caused. By trying to protect herself, she had dragged Jason into the depths of Brennan's power play. It was no longer just about her survival. Jason's entire future now hung in the balance because of what she had done. The more she thought about it, the more the weight of the situation crushed her. She had always admired Jason, seen him as a protector, as someone unbreakable. But now, because of her, he was vulnerable. And worst of all, she had no way of fixing it. The system was rigged. Brennan had made sure of that. If Jason refused to work for him, the so-called evidence would be enough to convict him. The legal system, even with all its flaws, wouldn't be able to save him from the case Brennan had built. There was no justice here, only power, leverage, and manipulation. And Brennan had all of it. Josslyn wanted to confess, to tell the truth, to take responsibility for her actions. But Brennan had made it clear, if she tried, it wouldn't just be her who suffered. He had the means to twist reality, to shift blame in whatever direction suited him best. If she spoke up, it wouldn't exonerate Jason. It would only make things worse, pushing them both deeper into the abyss. She felt helpless. No matter which way she turned, Brennan had already accounted for every move. The only thing she knew for certain was that if they didn't find a way out soon, Jason would be lost, and she would never forgive herself for it. In the end, through meticulous planning and timely intervention, both Josslyn and Jason were finally freed from the suffocating grip of Brennan's scheme. Every move had been calculated, every deception unraveled with precision. The false evidence that once condemned Jason was dismantled, replaced by a carefully reconstructed narrative, one that ensured neither Josslyn nor Jason would be implicated. The circumstances surrounding Cyrus's death were reshaped so seamlessly that no one could trace the truth. The authorities, convinced by the newly established version of events, closed the case without further question. Brennan, though still standing, was forced to concede. He had underestimated the resilience of the Corinthos family, their ability to counteract his every move. What he had once viewed as an opportunity to tighten his control had instead turned into a dangerous miscalculation. He could no longer pull the strings as easily as he had hoped. His influence remained, but it had been weakened. His power over Josslyn had slipped through his fingers just when he thought he had her locked into his grasp. Despite her newfound freedom, Josslyn knew better than to believe she was truly safe. The nightmare had not ended, it had only been postponed. Brennan was not a man who accepted defeat lightly. His retreat was temporary, a silent acknowledgement that this battle had not gone in his favor. But he was still out there, still watching, waiting for his next move. The weight of everything she had endured lingered in Josslyn's mind. The fear, the guilt, the knowledge that she had come so close to losing everything, none of it would disappear overnight. She had escaped this time, but the price had been steep. She could no longer live with the same innocence she once had, no longer trust so easily. Even as she walked away from the chaos, she felt the shadow of Brennan looming over her, a silent reminder that unfinished business always had a way of resurfacing.